unmute.
My cuckoo clock says it's noon, Bonnie.
Okay, well, let's get started, you guys. So welcome to the first We Talk Art of 2025. I'm so excited to be here and to have Anne Strutz with us. And it comes, her presentation, I think, is very timely because we are offering the new Out of Bounds Pastel mixed media show this year in April. And those entries are you're going to be able to start registering your works, I believe, on the 24th or the 25th of this month. So I'm thinking that Anne is going to give people some great inspiration to, get out their pastels plus other mediums and go to work. So, and then also, just as a side note, the juror and judge for that show is Tony Elaine, and he's doing a workshop at the Morro Bay Art Center in mid-May, and in mid-April, and registration for that is open now, right, Pam?
That's correct.
Okay, so with that, I would like to welcome Anne, and thank you, Anne, for taking time out of your schedule to visit with us for the next little while. So
yeah,
anyway, I would like you to tell us a little bit about your art journey. What got you interested in art? I mean, even as a child, and then
okay.
further on, just tell us your story.
All right. Well, first, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here and share my story and venture into this online teaching life here that we have that we can share with everyone. My story as an artist, like many, I feel, I've always loved art, and I grew up at the Jersey Shore near Asbury Park, and I was the youngest of four and a 10-year gap. And that allowed me, my parents, my mother, I was fortunate, my mom and dad both loved art. My mom was a city girl. She wanted to go into New York all the time. It was theater and art and museums. And my father was a fisherman. So I had like a fun bounce there. So I grew up at the shore fishing in the morning, and then on the weekends heading to New York, going to art museums. And so I was pretty lucky that way. And I mentioned that I was the youngest with older brothers because they all went to college. And then I was like 10, traveling into New York and Boston, and again, being exposed to the arts quite a bit. So by the time I was a freshman, I was lucky enough that I was able to get through my classes, but I always would have preferred to be drawing and doing something with my hands artistically. And my oldest brother steered me towards RISD, Rhode Island School of Design. When I was a freshman in high school, he took me there for a tour, knowing how much I loved art. And then I was like, okay, this is my goal. I'm going to school here. So I'll never forget getting that letter, which was really small and thin. And I'm like, oh my God, I didn't get in, and I did. So that was really exciting. And I don't know if a lot of people have experienced that, where you've wanted something for so long and then it actually happened. So it was really great. So then I went off to RISD. I started to be a graphic designer because I wanted to make a living. I was nervous to be, my parents were also practical. But then I ended up transferring into fashion design. So I went there for 5 years. It was an incredible experience. And it was hard. When you go through, or at least at that period of time, it was about pushing you to the limit, and nothing was ever finished, and you could always do better. Research and always doing better. So in some ways, it could have been harmful because your ego was 100 feet under the ground all the time, at least for me. But at the same time, it taught you how to grow and learn and always be curious and always challenge yourself. So I think I carry that through now. in my life without the doing it in a more positive way, perhaps, than some of my experience in art school. So when I graduated from RISD, I went to New York and I worked in the fashion industry, primarily leaning towards textile design, and did a lot of back then it wasn't the computers, so everything was done in gouache, repeat pattern painting. I did men's dress shirts for a while where I was actually using a ruling pen and just drawing the stripes of a dress shirt. So it was very tight technical stuff, which if you see my work now, I am nothing like that. Painting plaids, but I learned a lot about mixing color, which was great. And then from there, I started a family. So that forayed me into, we moved from New York, then I was in Philadelphia, Chicago, New Jersey, Charlotte. So I moved into teaching. I did a lot of curriculum development and teaching from elementary school through high school, a lot of art and science. And then when we moved to Charlotte about 10 years ago, I was like, okay, I'm done. I want to just pursue some fine art. And I had gone to a exhibition at the Noyes Museum in New Jersey, which is in South Jersey near Cape May. And it was either a Pastel Society of America or an IAPS exhibition of pastel. And I was like, I couldn't believe there was like super realism, and then there was expressive art, and I remember one of Jimmy Wright's flowers was in there, and I was like, this medium, I have to learn it. So that's where I started to focus on pastel only as a medium for me to learn and grow as a fine artist and painter. When I moved to Charlotte, I fell into a workshop. Somebody canceled. They had broken their leg, and it was the day before Kim Lordier was doing a workshop for the Piedmont Pastel Society. And that was my very first 3-day workshop. And my very first workshop, I had a thing of new pastels. I think Laura Pollock was in that workshop. And just being blown away, first, of how welcoming that community of artists was, because so many artists are very open. And then sometimes, unfortunately, I think we can be kind of judgmental too. I think because we're always trying to strive to be better, or maybe that was my RISD experience and my kind of experience younger in the very competitive world of the fashion industry, textiles in New York City. So going into this group and having Kim Lordier, number one, amazing teacher, and meeting all these people just made me fall more in love with the medium. So that began my journey. I said, this is going to be my master's in fine art, is to focus on the pastel medium. And then I just began taking many, many workshops, Stan Spurlock, Jen Evenhouse, Dawn Emerson, who has become a mentor of mine, Sally Strand, Nancy Nowak. Tony Elaine, I've taken a lot of workshops, and it was a great education. And then taking that information and kind of creating my own art from there, where I'm not trying to copy what they're doing, but I'm being inspired and learning the techniques, and then just playing in my studio. So that's kind of my journey to where I am now. And I'm going to go into this little slideshow because this will help me tell a little bit of my movement towards being a pastelist, but also letting go of the pastel a little bit and being open to bringing other mediums and let them shine also alongside of the pastel. So first this opening slide is all of a small selection of books that that I really enjoy in my studio and go back to quite often. And they can be very inspiring. They can keep you focused. They can, when you're kind of stuck, I find I'll go to reading to get inspired for ideas. And I think everybody's probably seen this slide long enough now, so I'll flip on. Okay, so when I first started, this was like my first pastel that I did that I really fell in love with. And I was like, I'm getting a grasp of this medium. Actually, this is my son and daughter who were at a museum and they were really, really bored. And they were like, so I snapped a photo of them and I was like, okay, and they were kind of being patient with me. And also people, when they see this, they're like, it's the angst between the two of them. And they are 10 years apart in age. So it was interesting. So this was kind of a beginning. One of my favorite pieces I did, it was after a Dawn Emerson workshop where I really, she had the brayer, you do all kinds of different exercise, kind of busting you out of what you normally do every day in the studio. So that was kind of a big breakthrough for me. A lot of charcoal is in this piece, but it is primarily pastel. And then this was another piece kind of along the same. I find I really have to be familiar with my topic. That's why I'm not real good with commissions unless it's a commission, something that I feel passionate about. And here, this one, Hanging Out in the 21st Century, was a first. I won a small award at Piedmont Pastel Society. I think it was Stan Spurlock was the juror, and it was like, okay, I'm kind of getting a hang of this, and it built my confidence. And I was able to, if you look in this piece, it's a painting and it's a sketch all in one. So sometimes you can look at sketches and not think they're final works. And again, if you think of pastel foraying into doing mixed medium, as a tool that you both draw and paint with, you could be open to not using as much of it and letting things show through, letting what's behind it or your underpainting show through. This is a piece been at a Jen Evenhouse workshop way in the beginning. Laura's been on this journey with me, so I believe she was in this workshop too, where I first learned that you could really let how much your underpainting enhances your piece. And the red in this is all of the underpainting. And without that red, if that was a different color, this painting would look completely different. So again, this is kind of making me be more think about being more conscious of where the pastel is going and how much I'm using. So that was another kind of breakthrough for me in my journey. And I moved on to fish because, as you know, I said I'm a city girl and I'm a fisherwoman. So two things I love: family, fish. I'm showing this piece to kind of show a little bit about a struggle. I wanted to do something realistic. One of the beautiful things about pastel is how super realism, hyper realism is incredible in the pastel medium. It's not what I do, but I want it. I have a lot of fishermen in my life and they all want fish that look like the fish that they catch. And so this actually had a brayer underneath it of oil, water mixable oil, and I was really struggling. I actually put water on the whole thing and whoops, hold on a second. I put water on across the whole painting to make it all an oil underpainting and restarted it basically at this point on your upper right. And then just struggling through with scratching with many tools. Having that oil paint underneath allowed me to remove the pastel and have oil coming through, and it stayed black. So that was really kind of a break. I mean, I know with the brayer and doing a lot of, it's like additive and subtractive painting, and that's what this would be. But this is the first time I really saw how valuable that was. And like, if you look, you can see my cursor, right?
Yes.
In this area here, you can really see where that was like left with the, with the brush and the oil. So, I was starting to be more careful about where am I going to cover pastel over something and where am I going to leave it.
And
Yeah.
can I ask you a quick little question? You know,
Yeah.
you're talking about the water mixable oils. Can you use just regular oil? Or
I have, yeah, it doesn't dry as fast in my experience. I am now, and I can answer that question better in like a month because I am now using some regular oil with some pastel on top of it, trying to work on birch panels and canvas doing that. However, you have to wait longer for the oil to take the pastel and dry. So with the water mixable, and also these are all on paper. And the regular oil, and I don't know why, I'm not a scientist, but when I did try to use regular oil, because I owned more of those, the bleeding of the oil around,
yeah.
it filtered out. Whereas with the water, if you use a lot, if you use it really heavy, you're going to still get that ring of oil. But if you use it lighter and you scrape off like the chunks, really thick parts with the razor blade, you will not get that oil spreading. So in my experience, you're best sticking to water mixable oil on paper.
And what paper? You probably will talk about this, but what paper?
Yeah, paper on my paper. No, I love the questions as we go. Reeves BFK is printmaking paper is the #1 that I use, and UArt. And I've called and spoken with UArt about having oil. I know there's a lot of concerns, but those are the two primary papers that I use. I have used some 300-pound watercolor paper, the smooth one. The back side of the smooth one. Cold is smooth is cold, hot is bumpy.
Hot press.
Hot press. Hot is, yeah, thank you, Laura. So it's the hot press is what, but I have, it depends how much texture you want. So what I use would be the hot press, the back side. 300-pound, real thick.
Have you tried using the Arches oil paper?
I have actually, and I've done some oil paintings on those, but I actually, so I haven't done the brayer on them, but I imagine it would work.
It does,
just the same. Yeah. Yeah. And what I will say is that if you're working on that Arches oil paper, it does have quite a bit of texture. So you have to be comfortable with that bumpy surface and that showing through. Typically, when I approach a painting, I don't have one process that I go through. I have a painting and I'm like, okay, what is going to work with this? Do I want to do it on printmaking paper? Do I want to sand its surface? What is going to lend itself to, do I want to work on Sennelier, Lacarte, where I'm not going to have any wet medium at all? What is going to be the best surface for me to work on to get the end result that I want? So because I'll work with a brayer and oil paint or watercolor or gouache and pastel, I will ask myself these questions, and it's not just a single process that I go through, which is something like when I teach a workshop, I kind of talk a little bit about too, and throw out all different types of papers for you to try, because it can make a big difference what your surface is.
Right.
Another thing also to keep in mind is, because when I'm working with a brayer, I will do many, well, I'm jumping ahead of myself. Let me move forward here. So the brayer, I did make this little slide so you can see what, I tend to assume everybody knows Dawn Emerson and brayer working. I met her 8 years ago, and this, I'm going to foray a little bit into how wonderful it is to be a volunteer for your organizations. Because I became the president of Piedmont. First, I became a workshop helper, and then I became the president of Piedmont Pastel Society for a while, and having artists stay at my house, interacting with all the people, putting all that time in, was just an incredible experience. And none of these things could not happen without volunteers running them. So it also enhanced my learning experience, because some of these artists that were coming in and people in the societies wanted to share information with me and help me grow and help me on my journey to be a better artist and to be a better teacher. And so I just want to say, like, that was an incredible experience. I never would have had Dawn Emerson staying at my house for a week and realized that, wow, this is a great mentor for me, because we click so much in our thought process. And she was so much further along in her journey as a fine artist than I was. So, so she introduced the brayer, and I use it differently than she does, probably not as effectively in many ways. She does a lot of different things. You know, if you look in the book, you can make all different textures and patterns, and which is really cool. Segues into mixed mediums as well. I just really like to draw with it. I draw and paint with the brayer. So this little, you know, it's razor blades, bamboo skewers, knitting needles to scratch the surface. I work on a glass palette or a butcher tray, and I work with all different kinds of water mixable oil, but Holbein and Winsor Newton I find I like the best, and they have a great color selection. Also, when you work, if you're taking notes on technique, each color has its own what's the word I'm looking for? Like own aspects, own properties.
Properties.
Yeah. So some will be slicker, some will go on more opaque. So in my studio, this is one little corner. And you can see I have a lot of stuff always available for me to pull out at any time. So when I approach a painting, I'm thinking about, am I going to use art graph sticks, which are wonderful. I draw with those, and they're drippy, and my hands get messy. And then do I want to throw some watercolor or gouache on there? Am I going to maybe mix? I haven't really done a lot with oil pastel, but I'm getting into that. But this is all stuff that happens before pastel. So from there, these types of images are what are segueing me into, as pastellist or as a mixed medium artist. You think of mixed media as adding on all the time. Like at first I'm like, mixed media is collaging with, you know, decoupage and then oil paint on top. And then, you know, maybe you're gluing something, three-dimensional beads or something else on top of the mixed medium. But really, a lot of us as pastelists are already mixed media artists. We will use alcohol washed pastel underpaintings or watercolor underpaintings, or like me, the brayer as an underpainting, and we apply pastel on top. If you think about applying less pastel on top and not covering the 80%, you already have a mixed medium piece of artwork. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So in these pieces, one thing I will do a lot of is I have cheap white paper or newsprint. I really like white sketch paper. This top brayer drawing is done on a non-archival piece of paper that will not last forever, because I can paint a lot of them. So I'm not always thinking every single thing I'm going to do is precious. Now, over time now, I'll use the Reeves BFK, because sometimes I find I really like what I do, and then you can't completely recreate it the same ever twice. But just in learning and practicing, you can't think of every single thing you do as, you have to allow yourself that freedom to explore. So this top piece has no pastel, and the bottom piece is a watercolor underpainting with oil brayer work on top and pastel, but not 80% pastel. You can see there's pretty much the white, a little bit of the dark blue, and a little green, and those little specks of red are the only pastel on these. This is another piece that started with a brayer underpainting, and then it has pastel on top, selectively placing it. However, so we all like to enter pastel shows with our organizations, and they have to be 80% pastel. So a lot of times, like these pieces before, I wasn't thinking ever of even entering them in a show, but this one I wanted to enter in a show. So I was like, okay, I have to have a lot of pastel on top of it. And so you're going to approach a painting differently if you're going to enter a show versus not entering a show. And I think there's a really good place for that. And I think there's a place for pure pastel, but sometimes our creative vision that we have for what we want our piece to say in a story, it can stifle us a little bit, where we're stuck on having to have that much pastel in order to enter a show. So I don't know how you organize that in your studio, but sometimes it's good to just paint for the sake of painting so you can grow, and let the painting tell you what it needs when you're working. This is another pastel. It has brayer, a watercolor, then an alcohol wash of pastel, and then brayer, and then pastel again, and a lot of scratching and razor blade work. This piece is about, I want to say, it's sold, and it's probably about 30 by, well, maybe not, like 25 by 40. It's very, very large.
And how did you get, if you could go back, how did you go back? How did you get the texture at the top right and in the middle of the biggest fish?
The top
very
right
intriguing.
was a clay brayer that, wait, I can grab it. Or it's something similar. It's not the exact one, but so you can get these tools that have for clay making that have textures on them. So this actually was a roller that had these little squiggles on it, and I put the oil on that, and that's how, and then how the pastel took to that oil paint is how I got that texture. So it's very accidental. I couldn't have planned that. That's something that's wonderful about the brayer that I love is like, I have to respond to what's happening there and what I'm going to do with it. And then when I'm choosing where to put the pastel on top of it, to not cover up all those cool things that are happening underneath, which took a long time to not complete. I can't tell you how many paintings I've done where I completely covered the brayer work, and I'd be like, why am I doing that?
This is fabulous. This is such a great piece.
Thank you.
So, Anne, are you using a lot of the pan pastels, or are you using?
No, I actually do not. I mean, I use all kinds of pastels. I would say like the white in this one is definitely a Diane Townsend Tirage. And I use have Mammoth, M-A-M-U-T, pastels, Unison, Diane Townsend are definitely a favorite. Blue Earth, Terry Ludwig. I mean, yeah, but the pan pastels I have not used that much. I keep trying to work with them more. I like when you make them look like a watercolor, but I don't like to say I'm trying to make my pastel look like a watercolor or an oil or a, but kind of when I'm using them in a more translucent manner. Another thing is like this piece is UArt. So I do use sanded surface, and the pan pastels are not as good on a sanded surface. Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Anne. When you framed that piece, what did you use for your glazing, your glass?
Okay, so I'm really lucky in some of these. This piece I sold unframed. And if I can sell my work unframed, I'm going to sell it unframed. When it goes into a gallery, it has to be framed. But the person who purchased this bought plexi museum plexi. So they spent the money because where they were going, they didn't want the reflection, and they did not mat it.
That's beautiful.
But I always use larger pieces, and that's a problem. I mean, it's a big debate. I mean, if you're going in galleries, you have to frame them for the gallery, and it costs you a fortune. But if you can sell the pieces, I was fortunate to sell this online, and I sold it direct, and I didn't have to worry about that. I always advise the person, though, saying, hey, this is kind of a funny story. So I was at a Stan Spurlock demo, who's also another I view as a mentor of mine. And he did this demo of Normandy Beach, and it was huge. It was like 25 by 30. It was a big piece for a pastel. And you had to like draw to get it because he was selling it he sells his demos very reasonably for the size of the painting. And I won. And as soon as I won, my face dropped because I was like, oh my God, I have to frame it, because of the cost of framing it. But it was worth it. It was worth every penny. Well, he framed it for me, which was really great but I think using museum glass is important.
Yes.
And that one I framed large with the glass. So it's very heavy, but I didn't have to spend the money. I don't even think they had the good plexi at that point in time. So it was regular glass.
And I'm sorry, could you just again tell us what the layers were on that piece?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so this started with a watercolor underpainting. And then to me, it wasn't like I wanted to get, when you do an alcohol, then it was pastel with an alcohol wash. And I could get some of those brush marks, like, where you don't make it smooth, like you can kind of see in here and in here. All these marks, these add to I think people look, a lot of my workshops are marks in motion, and the energy, and all those little marks in solid, quiet places add to the energy of the piece. So that's why then I did the alcohol wash over the watercolor, and then it was water mixable brayer, and then pastel on top.
Thank you.
And I even think some of these black marks these ones might be charcoal. This piece was a watercolor underpainting with a brayer that had multiple colors on the brayer. You can see that in here and here. These are brayer marks. And I actually loved this with just the watercolor and the brayer fish. I wanted to enter this in a show, and it's part of a series that I'm developing kind of based on woodcut printings. And I was looking at these. I don't have the patience to do the registering for woodblock cutting or printmaking, which I'm very much drawn to. So I was like, well, I could take some of the mark making in here, like these lines, create movement and motion with the pastel very close in value to what the watercolor underneath was, and cover the surface enough that I could enter it in a show. So I don't know if I'm proud of that, but that is truly what I did. It was, and had I not had to think about wanting it to be in a show, I never would have created this beautiful piece with all those marks on top. Although it was beautiful without them as well. So it's very selective, very careful. It's a minimalistic piece that was, for me, I'm a very fast, energetic, overwork. And Dawn, as a mentor, was saying, Anne, you got to slow down. You got to slow down and think a little bit before you make your marks sometimes. And so this was very much an exercise in slowing down and thinking about where I was going to place the pastel. Again, this would have been beautiful also without thinking about covering the surface with so much pastel. But look at how in the fish, this beautiful oil work. And then how much this pastel, just this little bit of purple and red and this coral color, just made it sing. So sometimes I think if we have these beautiful, I know a lot of people use watercolor as underpaintings, and you have this beautiful watercolor underpainting, and then you just choose selectively of where you want to set your pastel. And you're not being like, sometimes it was like, I would feel like I'm not being faithful to my medium, but and letting it go because I consider myself a pastelist. But then I said, but I'm really making this pastel shine, really showing the beauty of the medium. Then I had an opportunity. This is all kind of happening in sequence in my journey. I always did flowers just as warm-up exercises because I like to warm up with not working on the actual painting that I want to create that day, because I feel I get stale if I do that. I want the work to be fresh and energetic. So I would just pull out these flowers. It was an excuse to always have flowers in my house and do these brayer paintings. And then I was asked to do the dueling demos in flowers at IAPS, so I did more of them. And then I was asked to have them in a gallery. So this, again, if you look at this brayer drawing, I loved it just like that. Here, because I was also viewing myself solely as a pastel artist, this has an alcohol wash of pastel. The black is the brayer, and then all the color is the pastel. And on this one on the far right, again, it's an alcohol wash with pastel brayer work and then pastel on top. So as I said, and that was okay. So this also goes back to listening to what's presented in front of you, looking for clues in your life. Like, I'm not a floral artist, but I was like, I had an opportunity, I was going to go for it. And I listened, to that opportunity. I was looking for things to happen. Here, I'm not a landscape artist. If my son wasn't a mountain biker, I never would have, and I found myself out in the forest all the time. And I'm like, well, wait, I'm going to paint this. I never would have forayed into being a landscape artist, which is a lot of what I do now. I had no desire to do landscapes. This piece was on UArt, and it is right in this painting. It is charcoal, brayer underpainting, and then charcoal and pastel. And these just are the stages, so you can see. And this was the final stage. And then one of the exciting things that happened in this painting, which doesn't have to do with mixed media, but was that I was so frustrated with it, I scratched through it because I thought it was a disaster. And that's what finished the painting and gave it all that energy, was all those crazy marks.
What did you scratch with, Anne?
Probably the back of a paintbrush. That, or I use bamboo skewers or a knitting needle. So that forayed into doing pastels. So here is this piece on the left of the marsh, is of an area in South Jersey, and it's purely pastel. But what really hit me was I used the pastel as if it were a brayer, the pastel stick, breaking things into these big shapes. So this also showed me how working a lot with a different medium or a different tool enhanced when I just wanted to do a pastel sketch. And yeah, so I really enjoy that experience of then departing from just doing solo pastel and then going back and just saying, oh, I don't want to mess with all these different materials. I'm just going to do a pastel. And the upper right, this was done, it's not plein air. I was in a room. We were in this beautiful place looking out at this view, and I painted it. And this has a brayer. This is all brayer and pastel. And same with the lower piece is brayer and pastel. I'm gonna flip through that one. Okay, so here's where I am in my journey now. I had an opportunity arise to paint. I go to East Hampton, Amagansett. My brother's had a place there since I've been, I think, 13 or 12. So I go out and visit this place often, and I was doing some paintings, and my name was given to somebody who has an online gallery, and they wanted me to have paintings of, it's called, what's the harbor? It's Gerard Drive, Accabonac Harbor, and I forget the name of the bay. Anyway, there's a bay, a harbor, and it's just beautiful. But they wanted something more contemporary, and they did not want pastel. And so I was like, oh, but I'm a pastel artist, but it kind of pushed me to paint in oil on birch panels. And this is a piece that's a brayer and charcoal on paper. And this is a piece that is on printmaking paper, which is water mixable oil brayer work, and pastel, very minimal pastel. And I didn't show my oils that I have with them, but what I wanted to say, express to everyone when you're presenting, if you're interested in galleries, I went to Art Basel, and then I've been in Crescent Butte and Breckenridge and some different areas. And my experience out in the Hamptons at a few shows I went to where we were displaying our artwork, there was plenty of work under glass. Watercolors, mixed medium pieces, they're under glass. Yet this person was not willing to show my pastel work. So I was like, well, then instead of saying it was a pastel, when I presented the work, I said, this is a mixed medium piece of artwork. It's on printmaking paper with watercolor, oil, and you don't have to say water mixable or regular, but it's watercolor, oil, and pastel. And then they had no problem taking it. So that I found very interesting in my journey into selling my artwork. So I in the past would have called this a pastel painting. I'm a pastelist, and they would have said, I don't want that.
And just to clarify something, you're talking about water soluble oils, not water soluble inks, right?
No, water soluble oil paint.
Right.
Yeah. So now, I had an opportunity arise. I like painting in the oils, but I was missing the pastel work. And then I also now feel freer not covering a painting completely with pastel. So therefore, it wouldn't qualify entering a pastel show, and it's really a mixed medium piece of artwork. I want to share this because these are pieces that are in progress, and I'm trying to decide how much pastel do I put on them? What other mediums can I use? Do I want to put some collage paper on it, or do some kind of building of layers in the rock area where the mountain biker is? So asking questions as you go along. What can I use? What if I do this? What if I don't cover it? What if I add some gouache? What if, that constant curiosity of how to convey the story you want to tell. Yeah, which is basically what this was a slide just to remind me that I wanted to tell you guys that.
And about how long has it taken the oil paint to dry?
Okay, so it depends on how thick you're using it. But I have been able to go do a brayer painting and go right on with pastel maybe 10 minutes later. I'll take a razor blade because sometimes I'll get gobs, and typically now I will always pull that off. Also with the razor blade, if you have it thick, you can almost create new marks with the razor blade. So very quickly I can go with pastel.
Anne, have you done anything with printer ink as an underpainting or with the brayer?
Printer. I haven't I have experimented with them, but the only reason I haven't kept working with them, I know Dawn Emerson uses a lot of Akua inks, is I don't want it to take longer to dry. I know the Akua inks, if you use pan pastel on top of them, it's very interesting because the pan pastel will stick to the Akua ink, which is kind of a cool effect.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so I think I showed another thing that I'm starting to explore is collage. When I start, as a teaching tool, you can use collage for people to break down shapes. In a lot of my fish paintings, I would just cut out little fish shapes and move them around because a lot of it is from my head and it's imagining more of a composition and a play on pattern, which kind of falls back to my textile background. And so these, I have these, I love them. And I'm like, okay, so how can I add pastel on these and how can I maybe incorporate collage into my work? Initially, I wanted to actually draw or paint in gouache the pattern work because I don't consider myself a collage artist. But I'm struggling with, well, why do I want to spend all that time doing that if I can have a beautiful piece of paper and, attach it to a surface and then work pastel on top of it and varnishes but it's just another tool for you to use and if you go anywhere with it, well, I still want to add some pastel, but how can I use collage as a mixed medium additive to my process? So that's pretty much the slideshow. I don't know if anybody has questions or if this has helped you guys at all with thinking about mixed medium and more thinking of both as additive and subtractive in your pastel work.
And what I see is that you're using a Linco adhesive for your collage.
Yeah.
And then also a spray fixative
Varnish.
pastels.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that type of adhesive and why that is.
Well, the Linco is pH. It's it's not going to eat away at the paper. So, and I'll put it with a brush. Like I won't just, when I first started, and sometimes when I'm in a hurry, I'm just going to squirt it on, boom. I don't care what this is going to look like. But now that I'm actually foraying into using it in final pieces of art, I'll apply it with a brush. Sometimes I'll put a little bit of water in to kind of make it spread a little bit better. And then the spray is just like a Krylon varnish. I'm not an expert on that yet. So I just started playing with that. I've also started to play with mixing pigment, like metallic pigment, into a varnish and applying it in selective areas on a painting. You have to be careful on top of the pastel because it'll smear. But even if it smears, it's like when you first put it on, you get that pure pigment and then it kind of dissipates. So a lot of playing and experimenting to find what works.
Somebody asked, let's see here, what about oil sticks, I think. How do you use oil sticks?
I've used oil sticks on my oil pastels or oil sticks.
They asked oil, they said oil sticks, so
Okay, so
they're
oil
two different things.
it's just oil paint in a stick form. And when I've used the oil sticks, I also will use the linseed oil to thin it down if I'm getting, and spread it. But it's really, a lot of times I haven't used it with pastel. I've used them on my oils. And I do like them because it's very much like holding a pastel stick,
Right.
Painting with them. So they would work very well with pastel. I know Dawn Emerson has done that.
And how are you use oil pastels? You said you were just starting to.
Yes, same thing. But the oil pastel will not go on top of the chalk pastel.
Right.
So you can use it. I think of the way you can use it I use it almost like a gesture drawing. So I can put it either before or after the dry pastel, but if it's after, it's going to be more of thinking about an outline versus going right on top of. I mean, it can go on top, but it's not going to adhere well.
Right. Somebody asked, do you use a fixative in between layers? I'm assuming pastels.
I have used fixative sheerly for the purpose that I have overworked something and I have no tooth left. And also the type of art that I create is not hyperrealism. A lot of the pieces that I have, say, even this piece, it's very minimalistic. I'm not using local color. So using a spray fixative on any of these is not going to, if it alters the color a little bit, it's not going to matter to me that much. I mean, I might not like it. Of course, it's going to matter if I don't like the outcome, but it doesn't change it so much that it's changing the integrity of the piece.
Mm-hmm.
So I use, fixative on something.
Okay. And somebody is asking, I like using dark pastel underpaintings, but then I have problems with future layers of lighter pastels causing a ghosting effect on the dark areas. Do you have any tips for that?
I'm wondering, Laura, you might have an answer to that. I know the only time I've had like ghosting is more like the chalk falling, the pastel falling and creating, but I don't think I've ever experienced that. Have you?
I did actually. I use a lot of Terry Ludwig eggplant, and yes, it precipitates, it falls. And one time Liz Haywood Sullivan was at our house and I showed her the problem I had with that. She says, you have to lock it down. I said, what do you mean? She says, you have to either use some type of solvent or alcohol and have it embed into the grid of your paper. And then once that's dry, you won't have that move anymore. It'll be there.
And
You can go over.
The ghosting, can you ask if it's that, I don't know if I'm understanding ghosting.
Jean? Can you unmute yourself and ask your question directly and maybe explain that?
Yeah. Hi, Anne. Yes, I meant like when the pastel falls and ends up on the darker areas. Even if I've done a wash, I sometimes feel like it just really mutes the dark to the point where it doesn't have the effect that I
It doesn't have the
wanted.
punch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I only know like say if you were to watch some artists who do skies, I know Stan Spurlack, when he does a large piece, he starts with the sky and works his way down. So he doesn't have to contend with the dust. So
Okay.
yeah, I wish I could answer that better for you.
Yeah, thank
yeah.
you.
Okay.
And I was going to ask, out of all those books, this is going to be a tough question. Your
Uh-oh.
very first slide, was
Yeah.
one of them most instrumental and influential to you?
Yes. Can I say two?
You can say
There's
two.
Well, there's two different themes here. One is productivity. So write it down, make it happen, was very influential in me setting goals for myself, which then, you know, I'm very fortunate because I didn't have to be the provider for my family, where we were the main source of income. So that with that, being that fortunate, you can also get distracted, being taken care, with life and family, and writing down my personal goals and following some of the scripts in that helped me set these goals. Like when I first started, I wanted to become a PSA. I wanted to get my master circle. I want to be in galleries. I want to teach, and having those goals. So that was one, although they're all wonderful. And then from an artistic perspective, oh, that's a tough one. But most recently, I would say it is Clear Seeing Place, which leans along the same as the Hawthorne on painting and the Hench on painting, because they're talking more about not technique. They're talking about you as an artist and what you're trying to convey. So I find those two things really, those two are Clear Seeing Place, hearing Brian Ruttenberg, who is a contemporary artist, about his process and how he became the artist he is today and what inspired him. And he even talks about his daily show up routine and all that. I would say those are my two favorite.
Thank you.
That's good. I was just going to ask you if you had to only pick three books that you could only take with you forever, what would they be? And I think you just answered that.
Yeah. It's tough though. I'd have a hard one with that one. I mean, I'm really into the Stoicism these days, and that helps me stay on track too. So I have a lot of mental health things that are working me alongside my artistic journey as well. But yeah, I recommend, reading and remembering that, technique and process and learning the core I mean, I was fortunate because I went to art school. So I learned a lot of the fundamentals. So I'm coming from a place where I had those drilled into me. I by no means have mastered them. I think I'll be working on color, value for understanding it for the rest of my life. But sometimes moving beyond that, just a formatted process. I think that's one of the things about Dawn Emerson as a mentor that has been very valuable. She pushes towards not just the technique, but what it is you're trying to say.
And what was your third book? I missed that.
Well, I had Clear Seeing Place, and what did I say the other one was? Right.
Write it down.
Happen. And my third, well, I had the Hawthorne on painting and Henshaw painting, which are these little books. They're very little, but they've been my friend in the studio for the past month, very much so. Which is again, very much not just as an artist, art as a process, as a formatted process, but more the thinking behind what you want to say.
Thank you.
And I have another book that I really like. It's a motivational book, and it's called Move or Die. It's by Chris Carlisle.
Oh,
He was a conditioning coach for the Seahawks. I think is his last coaching job, but he's a coach from high school students on up. And there's some really good notes in there that really.
Move or Die. That sounds
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, and there's another book about it, but it's Chris Carlisle is the author.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean he talks about things that are really related. You can really relate them to an artist and your journey and your practices and things. And it's a pretty short book and a good read. He has a good story.
That's awesome. I wrote it down and I will be reading it.
All right.
And one thing, just I know you have this show coming up with that is exciting and maybe a little scary for pastelists to enter. Like, what do I do? I mean, all of a sudden I have this big, huge world open to me that I can use pastel and I can use so many other mediums. Is to really, it's going to make you play again. It's going to make you experiment. It frees you up. And spend a few days just trying different things, playing with your watercolor, playing with your gouache, your acrylics, your oil, and combining them with pastel to see what works and doesn't work. And don't be afraid, and don't be doing it for any end result. The deadline to enter this show is when is the deadline? It's in March.
I think it's in March.
Yeah, it's in March, no, February 27th.
Okay, so you have over a month. If you spend 5 hours, just tell yourself, today I'm going to spend 5, or if you only have 2 hours a day or an hour a day, I'm going to take 5 sessions in my studio and I'm going to just play and experiment with combining multiple mediums. See what happens. I guarantee you sometimes you're going to be like, oh my God, this is awful. Like, this is not working. This is the worst thing I could ever do. But you're also, I can almost guarantee you're going to be like, oh my God, that's really cool. And it's play, experiment, have no fear, have no expectations. Then look at what you did and find something that you liked and do it intentionally in a piece of artwork.
That's great advice.
You could start with, you want to do flower. I mean, you could start with whatever that theme is or whatever subject matter you paint all the time. Or you could just say, okay, I'm going to do a cup, or I'm going to do a bowl, or I'm going to do an abstract or whatever. But, just, it's so valuable. And we forget that, I think, a lot.
And I think it's okay for people it's okay to fail, because you learn from failings.
Yes. And it's funny you bring that up, because I know I didn't articulate this, but my mom didn't go to art school. She didn't go to college. But she had so much enthusiasm to learn and be an artist. And she took some oil painting classes. And I remember her always coming home. She had a wonderful sense of color, and she was a needlepoint artist. But she had a wonderful sense of color in her paintings. And she couldn't draw perfectly, or render something perfectly. But she did I have the most beautiful snake plant that she painted. And she was always so afraid to show up to her class. She was always so afraid that, she wasn't going to do it good enough. And what I took from that, and I'm sorry, a lot of things I learned from my mom were things that I didn't want to repeat. And what I said was, I don't want to have that fear, because fear just stifles you. It's not going to make you move forward. And I don't want any of my students to ever have that fear.
Right.
So I gotta let go of the fear.
And this is not going to be the last word, by the way, from Anne Strutz before that deadline, because she's going to be doing a demonstration for us.
Yeah.
On February 15th.
Yes, and I will be sure to be doing some mixed medium in that.
Yeah, great.
Great. Well, listen, Anne, it is such a pleasure to visit with you for an hour and listen to your story. And man, what a great slide presentation that you gave us. And you answered a lot of questions for everyone. And I'm thinking that you've probably inspired some multimedia works that we'll be seeing in the Out of Bounds
Yay.
show.
I hope so. It's so much fun.
So thanks so much for doing that.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I just have a thank you from someone thanking you for your presentation. So again, thank you so much, and we'll see you in February for the general members meeting demo.
Great.
And for all of you in the audience, thanks for joining us today. And then on the 12th of February, I'm going to be visiting with Alan Picard. And that's a Wednesday, and it is going to be at 5 o'clock Pacific time. So mark your calendars for that, and that should be an interesting visit. So everybody take care, get those paints and pastels and inks and all that kind of stuff out and do some work for the Out of Bounds show. And thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, and
Awesome
have
job,
fun,
Anne.
everybody.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.